Hello, beautiful people. It's a great privilege to be speaking with all of you today. My name is Onyii Orezi. For those of you that are on Facebook and Instagram that follow me, I'm sure you must have come across my post, Chronicles of a Mother. In my very last post, I promised that I was going to be sharing testimonies of my last pregnancy and birth of my last baby. Okay, so finally I get to do it after a long... It wasn't easy anyway, but thank God today I'm finally able to do it. Okay, I have three girls, I have three daughters. The first pregnancy was quite easy for me. I started feeling cramps. We got to the hospital, they told me I was already 5 cm dilated. And then in about 2 hours, the baby was born. The second pregnancy, I started having same cramps, We got to the hospital. I got there expecting that I would be 5 or 6 centimeters dilated, but we got there, was 1 cm dilated. In 10 hours, yes, 10 hours she was born. And then the third pregnancy, I felt, oh yes, I've had 2 babies now, I've had 2 pregnancies. I'm going to be able to do this, I'll just go in there and everything ends. But it took a totally different turn. At about 24 weeks, if I remember correctly, at about 24 weeks into the pregnancy, I started having contractions. In my mind, I felt, okay, probably it's Braxton Hicks contractions, But then I checked. At 24 weeks, it was quite too early to start having Braxton Hicks contractions. I went to the hospital and then I met the doctor that was a female doctor anyway. I mentioned to her, she decided to put me on some drugs, but then I refused, thinking, okay, the contractions were going to wave off. 26 weeks, I went to the hospital again for my usual check. I was still having the contractions. I mentioned to them, but at that point, the contractions had gotten worse. I had to be admitted. So I ended up staying in the hospital for a whole week. They put me on water therapy, they put me on nifedipine. It's a drug that's supposed to help ease off the contractions. So after a week, I got discharged because I started feeling better. The contractions had actually reduced. 27 weeks, 28 weeks came, 29 weeks came, 30 weeks came. Beautiful. I was doing great, though I was still having a bit of the contractions. Then came 31 weeks. I remember very well when I saw the consultant the very last time, he told me that at 31 weeks, I was going to be given an injection to help mature the lungs of the baby because he felt the baby was going to come quite early because of the contractions that I was having. So I took the injection and then I went back home. In few days into 31 weeks, I noticed the contractions had gotten so very worse and very painful. One of those days, I remember very well, it was on a Monday. My husband was going for a meeting in church and I told him, I did not understand how I was feeling. I told him to just keep his phone close by just in case, It wasn't barely 30 minutes after he had left the house, I began to call him. He came back immediately and went to the hospital. When we got to the hospital, I met a couple of doctors that were on ground. It was in the evening, and then they checked. Of course, they did their check and they told me, "Madam, you're 2 cm dilated." They spoke to the consultants on ground and then he asked them to take me to the theater to bring the baby out. At that very point, I was distraught. My husband was there with me. He left immediately. They said that, he did not say where he was going, but I knew within me what he was going to do. I began to cry because I did not want my baby at 31 weeks. Every woman that goes through the whole pregnancy phase knows that having a preterm baby is not it's not something that's very easy to deal with. I did not want my baby at 31 weeks. I began to cry. My husband came back and then he spoke to his friend who is also a consultant in the hospital. That was the one that was attending to me at that particular time. His friend spoke with the doctors and then they decided to do tocolysis, that's what they called it. It's to help keep the baby for a certain period of time till about 34 weeks, So they decided to give me an injection, magnesium sulfate. It's not something that I really would want to talk about. It's like an injection of literal fire into your body. I can never forget that night. I'm not too quick to forget that night. The ACs were on, the fans were on, yet I could not sit, I could not breathe. The pain that I was feeling, not just the pain, the injection was so, it was, the heat of the injection was so very much. Honestly, I thought that was it. I thought everything was going to end that night. They gave me another injection, Penta, to help ease off the contractions and then also to reduce the pain. That night, I can never forget that night. I thought I was actually going. The injections the Penta was making me so drowsy. The magnesium sulfate, I don't want to talk about it. But that night, I began to make confessions. I told God, if there is anything that I've done, if there is any wrong that I've done, that I've not even asked for forgiveness for, tonight, Father, please forgive me. Really, it was that bad. I kept on drifting in and out. I was so very drowsy. I thought I was going. But thankfully, that day ended. Day 2 came. Nothing more. 31 weeks came and ended. 32 weeks began. 32 weeks started with me seeing Shu. Remember, I've had 2 babies. I saw Shu on a Friday for my first baby. By Sunday, she had come. On Friday, I saw Shu for my second baby. That same Friday, she was born. And then I saw Shu this time. 32 weeks. That day passed. Another day into the week, I saw another Shu. This time I mentioned to the consultant, my husband's friend that was seeing me. And then he was like, oh, so why didn't you mention to me the first time? Spoke to my husband that we were going to bring out the baby. At that point, I was so discouraged. I was so disturbed. I was so troubled because I did not want that baby to come at that particular time. I had not even bought things for my baby. And then my sister-in-law told me not to worry. She went and she prevailed on the consultant. She came back and told me, okay, don't worry. The consultant has decided to give you some more time. That was the best thing I heard that day. And I prayed to God. I really wanted the baby to stay till full term. I remember within the course of the week, the 32 weeks, my husband held my hands and he asked me, what exactly do you want? Do you want a full-term baby or you want a healthy baby? Of course, every woman would opt for a healthy baby. We held hands and we prayed and believed God and trusted that we were going to have a healthy baby. Into the week again, 32 weeks, for the 3rd time, I saw Shu again. That was the first miracle that God did for me. He kept the baby in place. Even after seeing Shu 3 consecutive times, the baby was still preserved. The baby did not come. Still, then 33 weeks came. I had already done a scan at 32 weeks. The doctor was like, no, that the baby's weight was 2.8 kg. I did a scan in 32 weeks and then 33 weeks when we were reviewing. He said the baby's weight was 2.8 kg, that it was too much for a baby that was that age. He sent me to one of the scan places here in Abuja to do a confirmatory scan. I went to the place, came back with the results. It showed that the baby was actually 2.6 kg. And he said even at that, the baby is too big for that age, for that gestation. I've had 2 babies before. The highest, their birth weight was 2.5 kg. My heart was beating because I felt, okay, the previous pregnancies, the babies were 2.5 kg. If this one should come preterm, what would her birth weight be? That was the second miracle that God did for me. She came preterm, but she was born at 2.87 kg, unlike her sisters. That was another miracle that God did for me. I remember one of those days, my husband had just left the hospital. That was about 11 p.m. or thereabouts. All this while, I had been in severe pain. There were nights I would cry and cry and cry myself to sleep. And of course, all this while, I had been on constant injections, to help to ease off the pain and then to help make me sleep. All this while, the pain was there. I don't want to talk about the pain. Severe pain. Imagine cramps. The normal contractions for a woman that is at the latter phase of pregnancy, that's of labor, is 3 contractions in 10 minutes. I was having sometimes 6 contractions, other times 7 contractions in 10 minutes. And each of these contractions were coming with very severe pains. This happened for a whole 3 weeks. I remember this particular night, my husband came to see me. He had been with me from like 6 p.m. and then he left by almost 11 p.m. And then after he had left, the pains started again. I can never forget this night. The pain was so excruciating. I had never felt anything like that before. And then I began to cry. I cried and I cried and I cried and I called upon God. And then I laid on my bed. And then I heard it. I could not have missed it. I couldn't have missed it. I heard it and he said, "Be still and know that I am God." Of course, that night, I still took the injections to help me sleep and to help reduce the pain. But I held on to those words that I heard that night. Be still and know that I am God. These things continued. The pain continued. 33 weeks came. 34 weeks came. I was with my friend's mom. She came into Abuja to do a couple of things, and then she came to see me at the hospital. My friend, Nene Leonard. She was with me. We were eating boiled groundnuts, and then I felt the pain again. This time, I could not walk. I could not get my mind off the pain. The pain held me seated. And then she looked at me and said, "Let me help you call the doctors," which she did. They came and then they checked and they said, "Madam, you're 4 cm dilated. At this point, there's nothing we can do for you." I had been on water therapy, taking 8 to 12 bottles a day to help ease off the contractions. There were different things, therapies that they did to help with the pregnancy, just so the baby could stay till full term. I remember one of those positions, one of the other consultants asked me to take. My bed was turned upside down with my head down, my legs were down, and I can't even remember the position, but it was terrible. Did it help? It did not. It increased the contractions. Every time when I had to assume that position, I had more contractions, so they reverted to what it was originally. 34 weeks, as I was saying, my husband traveled that day. He had been scared. He had a trip to go for, but he could not go because he wanted to be there for me. He wanted to be around. That morning when I turned 34 weeks, he told me that he needed to go for the trip. I allowed him go, because he had done all he could. He had stayed with me. 34 weeks, they called it the gray area, that I was out of the gray area. So I asked him to leave. That very day, that pain came again. They told me they had done all they could. One of the doctors told me that they have never seen a case like mine before, that they were going to use it as a case study. I looked at my husband that day. She said that thing, and I told him, for them to be saying this, it means that this thing is coming from the pit of hell. But I thank God for the miracles that he did throughout this pregnancy. 34 weeks, 4 cm dilated. They called my husband. He was out of town, and they told me they were taking me to the theater that day. My sister-in-law was there with me in that theater. I thank God for that lady. She held my hands, And then I remember the anesthetist told me that day, he said, "Madam, don't worry. Everything is going to end today. This pain you're feeling, you'll not feel it any longer. After the baby comes, you're back to normal." And I looked at him. I trusted God, of course, to take me through the whole process. And in a few minutes, the baby was born. And then I closed my eyes and I thanked God. And I said, "Father, thank you." Of course, throughout the surgery, I was praying in the Holy Ghost, I said, "Father, thank you." The baby had been born. I felt it was all over. Another battle started. It was on a Friday morning. Saturday morning. The baby was born on a Thursday. Saturday morning, I was breastfeeding the baby. My sister-in-law, she's also a doctor. She's a pediatrician in the hospital. She came to meet me and she said, "Onyii, the test results are out. Maya's jaundice level is too high. She needs an emergency blood transfusion." I was very confused at that very point. Emergency blood transfusion for a 2-day-old baby. I released her. I let her go. That night, they did the transfusion. About 9 p.m., I went with my husband to see the baby. When the nurses brought her out, I looked at her and I ran out of the neonatal place. My little baby was looking so very distressed. My heart tore, my heart broke. I went out of the place and I began to cry. I cried and I cried and I cried and I asked God, what had this girl done to deserve all this? When I was having contractions, At every time, every point that I had contractions, oxygen was cut off from the baby. And from 24 weeks till she came at 34 weeks, this kept happening. It could only have been God. I remember a lady that was brought in that day. I was also there the day I was discharged from the hospital. She had a similar thing. She was having contractions too, preterm contractions. She was carrying twin boys. The boys died. It wasn't because of anything special that I did, but God chose to preserve the baby. They had that first transfusion. They had a second transfusion. They called it a top-up transfusion. Okay, fine. I felt okay. I can now have a breather. It's all over. It has all ended. When am I going home with my baby? They told me to give them some time. I remember I did a CS. All this while I was still having pains from the CS. That's a subject for another day anyway. There were days I went to the hospital limping. There were days that I was so much in pain, but I still had to do it for my little girl that was on admission. One of those days when I went to see her at the hospital to breastfeed her, they called me and they asked me, "Where is your husband?" I said he had gone to the office. They told me, okay, we need to do another transfusion for the baby, that her platelet level had dropped. She had a platelet level of 100 and something, and then they told me it had dropped to 31. I was confused. I was so disturbed. Platelet transfusion. That was the first time I heard that there was anything like platelet transfusion. I called my husband. He made arrangements with my sister-in-law for platelets to be transfused. They did the third transfusion, and then they did the fourth transfusion, another top-up of platelet transfusion. And then they told me that there was an infection. The baby had an infection in her blood, sepsis. We got the first antibiotics, the second antibiotics, the third, and then finally the fourth. I met a man that said that, see, madam, we've been looking for these antibiotics. It is nowhere to be found. But thankfully, that is another miracle that God did for us. My husband went to one of the pharmacies in town, and then they told him that the antibiotics had just been brought in. So the antibiotics was administered to her. She started getting better. So I kept on asking them, okay, finally, when am I taking my baby home? Her sisters, her older sisters, had been asking, Mommy, when is Maya coming back? Mommy, when is Maya coming back? Everybody was expecting her back home, and they gave me a day to go home with her. I was so excited. I felt it was all over, I felt it was all over. I held her one of those days when I was breastfeeding her. One of those days that I was so down. I thank God for strength. I was so very down that day. I held her. That was after the second the platelet transfusion. I held her and I was breastfeeding her. As I was breastfeeding her, I was so discouraged. I was so disturbed. And then I remembered when I was pregnant, when I had not even checked or confirmed the sex of the baby from a scan, I had a dream. Then I did not even know I was going to have a baby girl. I had a dream. And in this dream, I saw a very little girl, very beautiful. She looked about 2 years old. She was wearing my second daughter's red dress. One of her dresses, a red dress. And she kept on following my second daughter. Kept on following her. Very pretty girl with long hair. Kept on following my second daughter. And then I was wondering, who is this little pretty girl that was following my second daughter? At that particular point when I was breastfeeding her, and I thought I was going to lose her, yes, there were days when I was so scared. Does that mean that I did not have faith in God? No, I had faith in God, but there were days when my faith was down. There were days when I was full of fear. There were days when I was so afraid. But I thank God that day, as I was scared and I was breastfeeding her, I remembered that dream. And then I remembered I flashed the picture of that 2-year-old girl flashed before me. Oh, my heart was full of joy. I realized that God does not do things in isolation. When He showed me that girl in that dream, He obviously knew I was going to go through this, and He knew I would need this. He knew I was going to need this. He showed me that girl, that 2-year-old girl, that very day when my faith was down and my strength had gone. That picture of that girl flashed again. Guess what? My faith was up. I was so encouraged. I knew she was going to make it. I knew she was going to survive it. I knew she wasn't going anywhere, because that thing that flashed was a reminder of God, was a reminder of God telling me that this girl is going nowhere. I thank him for his faithfulness. I thank him for his mercies. You cannot argue God's faithfulness with me. I saw it in this last pregnancy. Okay, I handed her over to them after I had made confessions over her. I told her she was not going anywhere. She was going to leave and she was not going to die. I knew that God had a plan for her. I knew that she had a great destiny. That was why the enemy kept attacking her. But I thank God for everything that he did in that pregnancy. That day I handed her over to the nurses to put her back. She was not in incubator. She could suckle very well at 34 weeks. She could suckle very well. She was not on oxygen. I just thank God for the miracles that he did for this little girl and for myself. I just thank God. I am so very grateful. You know, finally, the day for her to be discharged came. I went to the hospital very excited. I had prepared her car seat in the car. You know, in my mind, I was going to pick up my beautiful baby back home, and then we're all going to rejoice. We're going to give thanks to God and all that. I got to the hospital. My husband dropped me off, and they told me, "Madam, we are sorry she's not going today." We did a full blood count, and we realized that her PCV had dropped. Her PCV was 31. That she needed another transfusion. That was it for me. But I still trusted God. I still held on to his words. He said, "Be still and know that I am God." And there were times when I was afraid. There were times when I was weak. But I thank God also for my husband. He was my right and my left arm. He kept on encouraging me. He kept on praying with me. He was there for me. I just want to thank God for him. I don't know how he did all he did. Shuttling between school, between office, taking care of the children, dropping them off in school, and then also coming to see me at the hospital. But I thank God for the tremendous strength that he gave him. Anyways, the baby got discharged, you know, after the last transfusion. That's the 5th transfusion. We brought her home. She was looking so weak. She was looking so sickly. She was looking so frail. But we kept on praying for her. We kept on speaking God's word over her life. Today, you should see that beautiful baby girl of mine. She is my miracle baby. I have never had this kind of experience before, and I want to thank God for the lessons that I learned all through that pregnancy. If there is anything that I'm not going to forget so quickly, it is God's faithfulness and his mercy. I had an overdose of his faithfulness and his mercy. You know, for someone out there, you might be wondering, okay, why is she giving this testimony? Why is she going through the stress to do this video? When God does things for you, you have to testify about it. I decided to share this testimony with the whole world for them to know that there is a God in heaven that is faithful. There's a God in heaven that is merciful. There's a God in heaven that is kind. I don't know what it is that you're going through. You could be a mother out there. You could be a father, yes, or a newly married couple that are going through this kind of thing. I don't know what it is that you might be going through, but I want to leave you with one thing. God is a God that never fails. He is not phony. He is not fake. God is not a God that changes his mind. No, he is a God whose promises are true. He is a God whose words are true. Remember, he told me to be still and know that he is God. He saw me through that pregnancy. He saw my baby through that 34 to 36 weeks of her admission in the hospital. Who would do that for you? Which other God would do that for you? Who? Tell me who? He is a faithful God. He's a God that is true. He's a God that keeps to his words. If you would only hold on to him, if you would only put all your trust in him, just be still and know that indeed he is God. Amen.